All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Terry Kirchner. I'm the Executive Director of the Westchester Library System. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Um, Jerry Nichols has joined us. For those of you who don't know Jerry, he has a long history working both as a library director, but also a system director here in New York State. As a co-author of the Handbook for Trustees, just really has a wealth of experience and knowledge about how libraries do or don't work here in New York State. So really, tonight's goal is that he can give you an overview of your role as a trustee to help you feel more confident in your activities as a trustee, but also to give you just sort of a broader sense too of how do libraries in New York State function, considering the uniqueness that we have. Um, and as a reminder, we will have the PowerPoints that are displayed today will be shared with you later on as well. So you don't have to write down anything that's written already. So Jerry, I'm going to pass it on to you and thank you.
Well, thank you, Terry. It's a pleasure to meet with your system members again. I've done 3 or 4 workshops. This, I think, is my fourth workshop over the last 20 years with Westchester Library System, and each one has been a pleasure. Um, but I always like to start these workshops out by thanking each of you as trustees because libraries are created by people like you, and you are continuing a legacy, hopefully into another century of serving a community and being institutions of optimism that believe that we're there to make the community a better place and to move civilization forward maybe a millimeter or two in our lifetime if we're fortunate. I also like a shout out quickly to the a couple of WLS trustees, which I met with only 3 weeks ago now. They've come back for more, which I guess maybe they just are gluttons for punishment. And also, I noticed that when I saw the list of the 89 people or so who have signed up for this evening, there's a number of your library directors and library colleagues have taken classes with me. I want to say hello to each of them. It was always a pleasure. I no longer teach, but I've left some great teachers in my stead that know far better, more than I ever did. But the program continues on and hopefully helping people become good library directors. So this evening, we're just going to quickly go through the real basics of library trusteeship. Um, I say this every time I've taught human resources courses on a graduate level, and the human resources experts that I know and respect have always told me that the number one reason people don't do well in a job is because they don't know what it is. And that's because in America, we don't seem to train people very well or very much, with the exception of the armed forces, apparently. But in our case, that's been my mission for the last 30 years. And I'd like to think that we've started a good foundation. So today we're going to talk about your job. We're going to talk about your partnership with the director, some very basics about your legal structure, which is rather complicated and important that you understand that going forward in your job. Quick thing about best practices in meetings in case yours aren't perfect. And then a very short thing about policies and planning. And then we'll have a lot of questions and answers, although if you have a question during my conversation with you, please use the chat feature, and I will try to address it within the context of my conversation with you. If it's something that's a little too detailed, I invite you that after we finish up in an hour and a half or so, that you stay on, and I'll be happy to give you some response. And if that's not going to be good enough, then we can correspond by email, over time, just to address or investigate your particular issue. So, to start with, this talk tonight, when I when I'm going to give you my opinion, I will tell you. But the basic fundamentals of this conversation are based on the regulations and the guidance of the New York State Board of Regents, who have chartered your libraries and ultimately have the authority to take that charter away. And they have given some very broad but helpful guidelines for your job as a trustee. And of course, then the Handbook for Library Trustees of New York State, which it's been my pleasure to edit for over 20 years now. And it has grown from a 30 some odd page pamphlet to a 120 page online version that I think many of you may have referred to. I do recommend that if you have questions that you can go to this the link online, because it's all of the links on the online version are live, and every law that is quoted is linked so that you can follow up to your heart's content. And of course, that's only for those of you who have insomnia. All right, your job. It's very simple. You have to fulfill your mission. First, of course, you need to know what your mission is. We'll get to that in a minute. And act in good faith, be loyal to the institution, comply with the law, provide fiscal oversight, which of course is very popular these days with the state doing state orders of libraries. Hire and work with the CEO. You might call them your director, but the Regents calls them your chief executive officer. You need to advocate for your library and plan for the future. That's your job. And it sounds pretty simple, but it's got a lot to it. So let's start with your mission. I've probably read I've read several hundred library mission statements. And nearly all of them tell you what you do. Oh, we provide books and other reading materials, and oh, we do programs, and oh, we do this, and this is what you do. Then very rarely have you articulated your purpose. Why does the library exist? And I started out this, one of the phrases I used before was that you're an institution of optimism, which is a quote from a friend of mine who happens to be an assembly person, which is nice to have an assembly person even know where their local library is. But the challenge to you as a trustee and as a trustee of a library is to fulfill the mission of your library. Now, the mission is far greater than just doing stuff. The mission is the purpose of the institution. Why do you exist? I mean, do you exist to make your community a better place to live? Do you exist to improve civilization and society? Do you exist to make sure that every person has a voice in our country, in our government, in our governance? Timothy Healy, the late president of the New York Public Library, once described reading, and I think you could describe libraries this way as well, as humanity's unending conversation. And the library's job is to make sure that every person has the opportunity to participate in that conversation. Now, yes, I sound poetic, and that's okay, because I think the library is poetic. The library is a story about us as a people, as a humanity, of all of our societies and all of our cultures. And I think that's why one of the reasons you need to dig deeper into why your library exists. Not just what you do. We know what you do, and you can articulate that as well. But I'm going to encourage you later on this evening to dig back into that strategic planning process and start with why. Now, if you want a head start on that, if you haven't done this already, one of the best TED Talks, if you don't know what TED Talks are, you look this up and you'll find out. One of the best TED Talks is by this gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek. He doesn't just counsel businesses, he counsels the United States military as well. And the heart of his philosophy is to struggle and find a way to articulate why your institution exists. What is your belief system? And then once you understand what your belief system is, you can then articulate what your vision is. And we're going to get back to this in a minute when we talk about advocacy. So let's just jump to values, core values. I don't care what library you are in, but these are core values that have to be part of what you believe in. If they're not, then maybe you should be helping another organization. The first one is intellectual freedom. Yes, we all know what this is, but I have a friend of mine who's now retired, but she had a sign when you entered her library, and it said, if there's nothing in this building that makes you uncomfortable, we're not doing our job. Her point was they had the responsibility to our society, to our democracy, to share all points of view. And that becomes very, very, very difficult for a trustee when there's very unpopular points of view that belong in the library. And most of them do belong in the library.
We're on mute, not on mute.
So I challenge you to understand that, embrace it, and be ready for the challenge to intellectual freedom, because every library gets challenged eventually, be it for having Harry Potter, as I was in my library, to having public meetings that are disturbing to members of your community. You need to deal with that. You need to be aware of it. You need to wrap your head around it and be prepared. The next value that I urge you, and I think libraries need to be leaders, some of you are and some of you aren't, is barrier-free access to information for everyone. And that starts with a disability. And we describe disabilities, and I go back to years ago where I first met with a board, and a trustee literally said, well, we don't have any, why do we need a ramp? Because nobody with a wheelchair ever comes here. I'm not making that one up. So it's not just for the obviously disabled folks. I'll give you an example, and I hope I don't get anyone upset, but a lot of for years, a lot of folks have done fundraising by putting these brick pathways in, and you put your name on them and all that. Those of you who have ever had to use a walker realize how awful it is to walk on those. That's not thinking, because a lot of people, actually my age, don't get around so well anymore. And I think you need to understand that, and understand that the sensitivity issue about being open to everyone then extends beyond just disability people. It extends to people with different languages, extends to people with different cultures. The library has to be welcoming, and sometimes you have to reach out to be welcoming. The other thing, of course, is the access issue that you need to make sure that people have access to all of the information they can. And there is no freedom of information in America, but that's what libraries stand for. So I think that's something you have to fight for. And many of our library colleagues around the country fight for a free and open internet, rather than allowing the communication companies to charge extra so that they can provide better bandwidth to preferred customers. The other is privacy and confidentiality of library records. New York State has been a leader in this for decades, and most of you probably have a little sign someplace in your library about New York civil practice laws and rules regarding privacy of library records. And the ALA provides a great background or information on a privacy issue as well. But it's something that you as a board need to be aware of. Now, layered on top of these core values are what are your community's values? What do they need? How can you best serve them? How can your library fulfill the mission for your community? These are just global views. These are global values. And I challenge you as a library board to take the time to articulate what your values are. Now, I'm going to digress a little bit. When are you going to do this? I challenge each of you to have a board, to carve out one part of a board meeting a year to talk about what your mission is, what your values are, what your hopes and plans for the futures are. You can call this your strategic planning meeting, or you can just say it's a retreat. And when you get back together again, have some bagels and coffee, and have it at a time when you can take a few minutes and talk about the important things, not just the business aspects of your operation. I see someone about convicted criminals wanting to spread illegal ideas. It's a freedom of expression. We can go into this until the cows come home. There are protections where you have the right to articulate the use of your meeting rooms. And I don't know the full details about this particular one, so I can be happy to talk about that after the meeting. Okay, your duties and responsibilities. Duty of care, duty of loyalty, the duty of obedience. These are what are articulated by the New York State Board of Regents, who again have granted you a charter. And as a charter, they allow you to act as a library. And as a library chartered by the state of New York, you're permitted to use tax money. So without that charter, you're out of luck. In addition, they want you to hire a CEO, and they use the term CEO on purpose because that's what America thinks of as the person who's running the place. And also to ensure financial resources are being used efficiently and effectively toward meeting the goals. That doesn't mean cheaply. That means that you have sufficient resources and that you govern their use appropriately and you use them effectively. We're going to go over each one quickly. Duty of care is a term that I think is used legally quite often. And I think this is something that should make each board member feel good about their position. And it simply says you act in good faith and you exercise diligence, care, and skill that an ordinary person would use in that position. That means you don't need to be an architect, a lawyer, an accountant, or professional librarian, for goodness sakes, but you need to be a good citizen who does their homework. You can hire those other people, and you should hire those other people because your job as a trustee is more important than all of them. So how do you do that? Do your homework. Learn about the library and the library world, which thankfully you're here tonight. We appreciate that, and that's a great example. Show up. I do board workshops all the time, and I've done hundreds of them. And one of the most familiar questions is, well, Johnny goes down to Florida for 3 months or 4 months every year, but we excuse his absence. And my question is why? Now, this year doesn't count because you can all Zoom in, but next year that won't count. I'm sure the meeting of open meetings law is going to bounce back to being a little bit stricter about the participation in meetings. But I think it's something that if you can't go to meetings or you're not being prepared, you should think that maybe your time could be better used helping another community organization, because the library needs trustees to be there, to be prepared, to be informed. The duty of care is also your fiduciary responsibility. We're going to come back to this again and again when it comes to working through what your responsibilities are at meetings. But you need to care about the money. I mean, that's your job. That's not spend the money. That's care about the money and oversee its use. Hire a qualified director, and I should underline this. Evaluate professionally. Rarely do library boards effectively evaluate their director. I say that after dealing with literally hundreds and hundreds of library boards. And then they wake up one day and say, oh, we should have. You're not doing your job unless you do it on a regular basis. And if you have a contract with your library director, the contract should state when you do that annual evaluation, and then both of you have to hold to that contract. Ask questions. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go back to that. You can't know everything, so your job is to ask questions. Be curious. And it doesn't and please, speaking as a former director for 30-something years, don't wait for board meetings to ask a question. Ask them when you think of it. Or if you have a problem or a complaint, or especially if somebody calls up to complain and tells you, Terry was nasty to me yesterday. Well, then you should say, okay, we'll deal with that, and just let Terry know that somebody called up and complained about him. Duty of loyalty. This is actually more complicated than you would think. All of you understand conflicts of interest. If you're a public library, and those of you that are special district, school district, and municipal are covered under general municipal law, you understand by law, you can't even show the appearance of impropriety And of course, none of you, no matter what libraries you're in, are hiring your brother to cut the lawn, hopefully. But in order to this, I'm going to take this a little bit further, but you all need to have a conflict of interest policy no matter what kind of library you are, and you need to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. The New York State Education Department has a website, and they invite people to complain. And the number one complaint that about libraries in the state of New York, which has more complaints than every other complaint, is the library board plays favorites, they hire their friends, or they buy stuff from their relatives. That's the truth. Now, whether it actually is true, I have no idea. Whether people think it's true, I can tell you they do. So be careful about that. And when I say nepotism, yeah, some of you have a policy where the trustees' kids become pages and stuff. I've had that myself, and it's not illegal. It's awkward. Let's be honest, it's awkward. Um, it's awkward for the rest of the library because they don't know what the kid's saying when they come home. But more than that, I think what's more prevalent is that you are in a very awkward position because all of you are involved in a community. You all have neighbors. You all know people that work at the library. It's hard to have friends work at the library. You cannot be their friend about the library. You have to be a trustee. And frankly, sometimes you've got to say, I really can't talk to you about that because I'm on the board. Because even the appearance of being buddies with somebody on the staff is awkward for everyone, and it undercuts the chain of command. And anyone who's been in any kind of business understands people need to know who's boss. And you're the ultimate boss, but it's got to go through the chain of command. And ultimately, the duty of loyalty is putting the library first. Now, here's my last comment about your challenge as a community, being active in a community. And I'm going to tell a story. I tell it all the time. I'm going to pick on Smithtown Library, which is down on Long Island. I went to a board meeting. This is a special district that serves 118,000 people. It's got a $9 million budget. The board has a meeting. A letter comes before the board. The board president reads a letter, and it's a Little League asking if they can have a parking spot during the season to put a trailer on, an equipment pod. And it's signed by Charlie. The board president turns to Charlie, who's the board vice president, and says, Charlie, what are you doing? Well, I'm the president of the Little League, he says. Board president gives the letter back to Charlie. He says, you take that back, you get somebody else to sign it, and next month you go have a cup of coffee, and we'll probably give you that stupid parking spot. But you're a trustee here. You can't be when you're with the Little League, you're the Little League president, but here you're a trustee. Now stop this, And I mean, that's the kind of thing we get stuck in all the time. You're doing a good thing for the community. Yes, the next month they gave them the parking spot, and Charlie was having a cup of coffee in the other room. What the heck? But be aware of that. It's sensitive because almost all of you wear multiple hats in your community. Duty of obedience is pretty simple. Obey the law. Know what the mission of the library is so it can fulfill it. If you don't know what the mission is, if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. You're going to comply with the law. But there are issues and instances where sometimes the trustees don't really dedicate the resources of the library to what the library's purposes are. And I mean, sometimes they donate money to a community organization, and that's not what you were given that money for in the first place, to give an example. And sometimes as a trustee wants to borrow some chairs because they've got a big party in the backyard to celebrate the pandemic is over. Those of you who are public understand that the state auditor has gone to town on schools and libraries. They took a little time off this year, but they'll be back. Fiduciary accountability is a big issue for everyone. And you have a governance responsibility rather than a management responsibility. So you need to hire a CEO that can manage it, and that's part of your fiduciary responsibility. If they're not competent, you need to get another one. you need to evaluate them professionally. You need to secure financial resources for today and tomorrow. Your job is not to save money. Your job is to get sufficient funds and to use them wisely. People in your community are giving you money to provide library service, not save money. I know that's hard for a lot of folks to comprehend, but that's your job. Don't be foolish about it, but use the money wisely. And then, of course, you need to monitor expenses, which we'll come to during the board meeting part of this presentation, and get an annual independent audit. You know, it still amazes me that in New York State, you're not required to get an annual independent CPA audit. And if you don't, you're crazy because you're spending other people's money. If nothing else, it's called covering your whatever. And lastly, your job is to be an advocate. Now, that might mean when things lighten up, going out to Albany. It might mean writing letters to your legislators. It might be going to Washington, D.C. to advocate for your library. But for the most part, for most trustees, you know what it is? It's being proud of what you do and being proud of your library and letting your neighbors know. And how do you let your neighbors know? You tell them. And if people find out you're a trustee, I'll bet you some people say, well, who needs a library anymore anyway? Or other people say, well, why? What does the library do? And your job as a trustee, your very first job, is to be able to articulate why you're a trustee and why the library matters. I'm going back to that third slide. So the illustration of this, the classic illustration, which still works very well. Many of you know what an elevator speech is. Those of you who don't, my quick story is that I was doing an ALA trustee lecture many years ago, and I told everybody in the audience, you know, an elevator speech is when you're in an elevator and Bill Gates gets in the elevator with you, and you have 6 floors in order to, you know, say hello to Mr. Gates, who's now giving billions of dollars to good causes, including libraries. And I said, now think about that while I'm talking, because I know you won't be paying that much attention to me. And this lady in the front row was raising her hand. She said, I got to say something. I said, no, wait. She says, no, I have to say. What do you? And I said, what do you have to say? She said, that happened to me. I said, what happened? She said, Bill Gates got in the elevator. After I expressed myself with language I probably won't use here, it was like, okay. And what did you say? She said, I was frozen. And it wasn't until he left that I said, thank you, Mr. Gates, I'm a library trustee. And he smiled and he said, you're welcome. But the point is, when your neighbor asks you, why are you a library trustee? Have an answer. Oh, we do good things. Not, oh, I have nothing better to do on Tuesday nights. Think about it. And that's why when I told you I suggested you watch that 18-minute TED Talk by Simon Sinek. He's going to talk to you about how hard it is to articulate that why, but how absolutely incredibly necessary it is for you to be able to articulate why your library is a critical educational institution in our society. So, going over it real quickly again. I'm sorry. Is it okay the public? I'm going to get to budgets using personal social media accounts. As for advocating, okay. I'm going to quickly jump back. Since this is an interesting one. Is it okay to ask the public to pass budgets using personal social media accounts? Does it appear to be a conflict, or I'm advocating? Okay. As a trustee, you should not be advocating to pass the budget. Don't do that. That's using, as an individual person who does not identify them as a trustee, certainly you can ask people to vote for the library. Just be careful about that, crossing that line. But you are, the First Amendment of the United States allows you to speak your personal opinion. And if your personal opinion is the library is important, fine. But as a trustee, please don't represent the library by saying vote yes. You do represent the library by saying vote. The library is an important part of our community. So, okay. Best practices. Simple. Due diligence. That's a legal term. It means do your homework. Respect the institution, the staff, and each other. There's always some trustees that don't, and that's unfortunate. You're a collective authority, by the way. Once you're elected as a trustee or appointed as a trustee, you have no individual power outside of a board meeting. Now, that doesn't mean when you walk into director's office, they're not going to say, "Oh, how are you this morning? What do you want to talk about?" But you should not be walking into the library and commanding any individual in the library. You do not have that authority. Indeed, you don't have the authority to command the director outside of the board meeting, unless the board has given you that authority to follow up on a particular issue. So your collective authority is incredibly important. I want you to, when it comes to dealing with your director, your job is to delegate. The better way to put it, one of my colleagues in a little mini webinar put it, you govern, you don't manage. You hire the manager. The manager works for you and for the institution. And when I say you, I mean the collective you, not the individual you. Positive corporate culture starts from the top. We all know that. If you don't get along and you don't treat the library with respect and the staff with respect, and the community doesn't respect you, and you don't respect the community, you are in a very poor situation. And then when you do have that a board misbehavior, and the board misbehavior can be anything from a board member who just doesn't show up on time or doesn't show up, and you keep giving them that excuse. You know, those of you who are public libraries know that, no, actually, all of your libraries, any board member that misses 3 consecutive meetings without excuse is determined to have resigned. That's the law, Education Law 226. But you're also kind-hearted. You give them an excuse for everything. Oh, Charlie's in Florida this, January, February, or March, and April, so we'll excuse him. Please. That's board misbehavior. The other board misbehavior is board members that are misbehaving, not acting well, micromanaging, overstepping the boundaries, not representing the library in an appropriate fashion. You know what I'm talking about because you've dealt with it before. Please don't let them get away with it. It's bad. The institution is bigger than all of us and any one of us. So that's your responsibility. And it is not easy. I understand. The director. CEO, Chief Executive Officer. They have to implement board policies. Now you don't write the policies, but you adopt the policies. I think it's important for you to understand that. And the policies are the laws of the libraries. And we're going to spend a little more time on that later. The director's job is to communicate very well with the board, to educate the board and inform the board. And I learned something when I first became a library director, one of my mentors said, you can never over-inform the board. Bury them in information. They can choose not to read it, but the fact is you need to stay ahead of them. Rule number 1, the board should never hear bad news from anyone but the director. Certainly not from their neighbors. And they'd like to hear the good news from me every once in a while as well. So the director has to keep the board well informed. And there's a lot of right ways to do this. And my personal technique I got once technology changed was at least every Friday afternoon, I would always send the board an email, letting them know that I was working, and also letting them know what happened that week, or just, good things that happened or issues that came up. And it just kind of kept everybody on the same page. The director manages library operations, day to day, week to week, month to month, and everything that means. From getting the sidewalk shoveled and the grass cut to making sure the bathrooms are clean and the books are on the shelf properly. They select the staff. I'll get to appointing later. They supervise the staff and they train the staff. The only staff that the board selects, supervises is the director. They need to be informed. they need to go to meetings. They need to participate and advise the board about professional practices. Going to conferences is not a bad thing. It's not a waste of money. And you guys can go to conferences too. You might learn something. Trustees learn a lot from each other. You'll be delighted and surprised at the wonderful people you meet at conferences from all over this country. The director prepares the budget, and often they'll prepare it with a budget committee of the board. But the initial budget recommendation has got to come from the director, and hopefully they're using the staff to put that together. They need to recommend new services and policies. That's not to say that a trustee can't say, hey, I was at another library and they're doing homebound delivery during the pandemic. Why don't we do that? Great idea. Sure. Why not? That's why you're getting around. Of course, the other good idea is I heard from a director that they started that and they decided, hey, we're just going to keep doing this. Forget the pandemic. This is working out great. We're going to keep doing homebound delivery. Not the people that are homebound, but the people who just want their books delivered. And the director represents the library in the community, yes, in cooperation with the board, but the director should be somebody who gets out there. Unfortunately, there are many directors who spend a lot of time in their office, and that is not where the director should be. They should be on the floor and in the community. And if they got work to do, they can come in early and leave late, which is the secret to success. Okay, how does it work? Mission, vision, values. Do you know what your mission is? Have you been able to articulate a vision? What are the values of your institution? Those are the things that you need to start with, and you need to review them on a regular basis. You need to talk to each other on a regular basis and communicate. Um, the director and the board are a team. Now, I know I'm speaking to 80-something trustees and probably 9 or 10 library directors. But I want you trustees to understand from someone who's been through this a long time, I know the director is your employee. I know you hired them. You probably might have a contract. They might be civil service. They might be a lot of things, and you evaluate them. But to them, the job is more than a job. It's a belief system. They believe in libraries, and they are loyal to the library. And if they're not, then that's another reason to seek someone else. But if you treat them as a team member, always remembering that they work for you, and they always remember that they work for you as well, it works out well. But understand that they're more than just an average employee that's there to make a buck because you're not paying them enough. That means you need to tell each other what you expect of each other. Be honest. I said before about, if there's a complaint or a compliment, let the director know and articulate it with each other. Now, when you have your annual evaluation, you should be very clearly articulating and laying out the goals for the coming year, because how else are you going to evaluate the director? What do you want to accomplish? What do you expect from the director? And the director likewise should be able to tell the trustees, well, this is what I expect from you. Go to a meeting once in a while. Help me at the Chamber of Commerce meeting or whatever. Or stop talking to the staff behind my back. Tom Peters was one of the management gurus of the last century. I'm dating myself, but he always used the term that I think he stole from Dwight Eisenhower. Delegate responsibility for today to your director and assume responsibility for tomorrow. And you do that by having a vibrant, ongoing planning process. I do not believe in long-range plans. I believe in a long-range or strategic planning process that is ongoing, cyclical in nature, and will come back around every year. And once you get used to it, it just becomes a part of how you do your business. And we'll come to that a little bit later. Honesty is the best policy. I happen to know, and there are libraries in your system, and some of you probably know this, where over time the board came to the conclusion that the director wasn't doing a good enough job for their community, and they weren't living up to their expectations. And sometimes they've approached people like me to say, how do I ask our director to move on? Or in some cases, how do you get rid of the director? And my first question will be, well, how have the evaluations been? And if they had evaluations, and most of them never did, the evaluations were wonderful. For 20 years, wonderful evaluations. And then all of a sudden they realized they really weren't that good. They weren't being honest. And now they're stuck with it. And so a good evaluation process, which we're not going to go over tonight, but a good evaluation process has clearly set out expectations each year, and then an honest conversation at the end of the year, and then where are we going to go from here? And it goes both ways. So please don't put yourself in a hole by being too nice. That's not being a good boss. Being honest is being a good boss. Okay, this is a whole workshop on itself about library law, which I've actually done for the Westchester Library System over the years a couple of times. But tonight I just want to give you, especially for you new trustees, a very quick, very brief rundown about legal structure in the state. First, and this has a lot of ramifications that you might not see on a day-to-day basis. The word library never appears in the state constitution, which means that borrowing money is an issue, or bonding is impossible for libraries. They have to go through someone else. But it also means that governments are not required to make libraries. What it does mean is that libraries have been established in this state and around our country by people like you. And I thank you for that again. Your predecessors decided that your community deserved a library, and they made it happen with their sweat and hard work. Public libraries are made by the public. Now, granted, we'll come to this in a minute, many of those public libraries were then given over to governments, which is, I'm coming to later on in this little talk here. Education corporations means you are incorporated, just like a business. You're like IBM, but you're incorporated by the Board of Regents of the state of New York. You might even have a corporate seal floating around your building someplace if you're an old enough library. Very fancy stuff. I found one of my early libraries. I found it was great. We could seal documents. Made me feel very important. In New York State, the term public library is used for all libraries that serve the public. And nearly all libraries in the state of New York that serve the public use public funds. There are a couple that don't, that are so well endowed they spend their endowment. I think and I don't think there's certainly not a handful of them. There's 3 or 4. Most of you all get tax monies one way or another. So the public thinks you're public. But the truth of the matter is about 45% of the libraries in the state of New York, these used to be 60%, but 20 years ago, many of you started to convert to being public, are what's called association libraries, and you are technically 501c3 not-for-profit corporations as defined by the Internal Revenue Service. Those of you who are association libraries are not subject to the same public laws as a true public library. Our association libraries, what's very distinctive about them, they're the oldest form. They're not being made anymore, but most of the libraries in the state began as association libraries. They're not just tiny. The New York Public Library, the Queensborough Public Libraries, the Brooklyn Public Library, they're association libraries. Now, granted, they get enormous public monies, but they are still private not-for-profits. A great number of your libraries in Westchester are also association libraries. And what's distinctive about them as well is that the library technically is owned by the board. And the board is self-perpetuating. The board appoints its successors. Now, there's a lot of good ways to do that. One way, the traditional way, is you pick your friends to be on the board or your kids. Um, well, I've seen that many times. Um, but but some others have, because you're an association library and you establish your own bylaws and are not governed by public laws in this regard, many number of association libraries engage the public in electing their trustees. And I said electing them. I certainly recommend that. Um, there's a lot of ways they do that at association meetings. Some of them do it at their annual budget vote. Some of them just do it. These days they're doing mail-in votes or email votes, but they engage the public in selecting the trustees. Now, granted, there's a lot of competition over trustee positions. Um, but it's because they tend to attract people that aren't looking to build up their ego, but are looking to help the community. So, but I really recommend, if you ever thought about changing the way your trustees are elected, as I said, there's a lot of ways to do it. There'll be some guidance on the state website about that in the near future. Um, but I think there was a principle that was popular in the United States about 270 years ago, called taxation without representation is tyranny. So I think it gives you a much stronger footing with your community if your trustees are selected by the public. Okay, municipal libraries are also quite prevalent. Now, these are actually departments of a village. This is or a town. And I know some of you are in this position, and I will be very frank with you. I don't have a job anymore, so I can be honest. This is the worst situation to be in. And those of you who lived through the 29 recession, 2009 recession, and now the pandemic, understand that you're helpless. You're just a department of the village. I will pick on a well-known library that's not in your area, but a young man that used to work at one of your libraries is now the director of the Onondaga County Library System, Syracuse. He was there 6 weeks, and he got a call from the county executive, and he said, "We're sending over the list of the 75 people you have to lay off. Have a nice day." Click. That's being a municipal library. Now, another awkward, situation is many of your association libraries, and I think probably most of you are in this boat in Westchester, are association libraries, and you get funded through a municipality. So you're at their whims and fancies. Indeed, I think there might be some trustees on this call, on this workshop right now, where I was speaking with their library last January and February, and they had yet to recover and get their funding back from the 2009 recession a decade later. I'm sorry. I mean, I am sorry. I don't know what else to say other than that's an awkward position. There are strategies to get out of that, but that's not what this meeting is about. But that's the situation you're in. You don't have stable funding. The last two, school district and special district. School district and special district, all municipal is a public library, so that's civil service as well and has all of the public laws, but you actually you're part of a municipality, your department. School district and special district, they're independent. They're elected by the residents of the district. Their budget is approved by the residents of the district. They can bond in a variety of ways to do their own buildings. And all of you actually have what's called a continuing appropriation. But in the case of a school district or a special district, the continuing appropriation, i.e. your tax levy, is voted on by the community. Or not. They don't have to have a vote. Indeed, last year, the majority of school and special district libraries in the state of New York didn't even have a vote. They didn't have to because they got the same money as they did the year before. For municipal libraries and libraries that are funded by municipalities, the people that are voting are the trustees of the town or the village. And there might be 5 people, and they're just deciding what you're going to get. It's not the public. And of course, for school district and special district, if the library board does not want to put a proposition up, it doesn't go up. If they want to put an increase up, it goes up. No one else can determine that. So their funding is very, very, very stable. But they're public. That means they have to conform with general municipal law, with public officers law, with civil service law. So, but they're stable, and they're not happy during the pandemic, but they're not broke. Quickly now about just to let you know where you fit in the whole state. The Board of Regents of the University of the State of New York is the ultimate authority when it comes to education corporations and institutions in the state. They establish, with the help of the commissioner, regulations that are guidance. They have effective law on how you operate in order to maintain their charter. And that's all done and managed through the State Education Department. And of the State Education Department, then a subdivision is the Cultural Ed Division, and then the State Library, and then the Division of Library Development. Now, you don't work for these people. They work for you. But if you want state aid, you got to fill out their forms. And no one likes to fill out their forms. But if you want construction aid, you have to fill out their form. If you want your annual state aid, you got to fill out your annual report. And if the regents have a regulation regarding, say, that you need to have a library director who's a librarian, if you serve a particular population, you need to comply with that in order to maintain your charter. Within that entire network or public library systems, there's 23 of them in the state of New York. They're all a little different because they're all formed, they're different legal structures, but yours is a cooperative system. And cooperative systems were created by the member libraries. It's a cooperative in every sense of the word. And they are funded by the state, and they do a lot of different cooperative services on behalf of the libraries. And each of them has a unique plan of service that evolves over the years. And they're there to help you. They're there to work for you. I just caution you that, they have to maintain your trust, and they can only do that by helping you out one library at a time. But I will just let you know that the dynamic of the public library system is challenging. Having had a wonderful career as a system director, I had 56 libraries. You can't keep them all happy. If we could keep 75% of our libraries happy, that was a good day. Because the libraries are so diverse. You've got little ones and big ones, and ones that are totally independent and run their own automation systems, and other that depend on you to do it for them. It's a very interesting job, a lot of fun. But all of them support you as a library, and you should be aware of them and participate in especially in the planning for your public library system and the kind of services you want. And frankly, I went to a Halloween party years ago as a Brillo pad. I used to have curly hair, and I had a big sign on it that said, "If you love me, you use me." So use your system. I'm going to come to a little later. I have a recommendation. I'm going to make them work for you a little bit more. You folks are welcome to throw in some questions there because we're going quickly. I've only had a few here, so let me go see if I didn't lose any. Oh, okay. Oh, I do want to go back. Thank you. I apologize. Let me go back. I did have I had a question from a member library before this who happens to be a municipal library. I actually know this library real well because I consulted with them many, many, many years ago. And actually, I didn't consult with them. I consulted with their village. And the village reminded me of that repeatedly. They had a question about shared spaces. The library is owned by the village. And apparently they're sharing the meeting room space. And the question was, how does this work out? How do the roles, responsibilities related to the shared space work out with other libraries? And I have a very simple answer, and I don't mean to be snarky about this. It doesn't work out. They own the building. even if you had an ironclad contract about how to use it, they could break that contract by simply saying, okay, we'll withhold money from you. Shared facilities are a wonderful idea. They're awkward. I won't say they don't work. Um, they work if you have a very clearly written agreement, not just based on a handshake, not based on goodwill, because people come and go. So if you're going to share a particular meeting space, you need to have it written out about what the rules are. And being a municipal library, again, it's their building. Um, so I wish I could make it easier for you, but over my 40 some odd year career, I've seen any number of. Another example is school libraries. You know, a library in a school, public library in a school, that has never worked out. The libraries eventually move out. They just there's just too much conflict. Um, so I haven't got a good answer for that library that wants to know, how do you handle their dealing with the village. You handle it diplomatically, politically, and legally, but you're a department of the village, and that's the way it is. And if you ever want to separate from the village and become a special district or something like that, look me up. Effective board meetings. This is where you do your work, and most of you do it very well. And I'm going to digress a little bit. Uh, in my career of working with trustees and working with boards, there's two kinds of boards I work with. The ones that are totally dysfunctional and it's a cry for help, usually by the system asking me to intercede, um, or the highly functional ones that want to be better. And the fact that you're here tonight means you're the second kind. You want to learn how to do it better. There's even some folks that I talked with 3 weeks ago, and they're back again. So that to me is a sign that um, I'm dealing with really good trustees, and I thank you for that as well. Let me start by saying, when I say effective board meetings in the trustee handbook, um, I, I I have a little comment there. It says if your meetings last more than 2 hours, you're not doing a good job. 2 hours is a long meeting. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to keep you 2 hours tonight. Trust me. Um, that most of you are busy. It's the end of a long day. You're just going in circles by 2 hours. So the board packet. I assume you all get a very complete board packet with your financials way ahead of time, with reports by the director and whomever else you want reports from, and an agenda that has been reviewed between the director and the board president. The agendas, they're pretty standard. Your old business, your new business. What I think is very important is you don't show up and find out what the agenda is. You know it ahead of time, and you have an opportunity to add to it. I used to start each meeting with a motion to accept the agenda in case something quick came up. There should be committees, and the committee report should have been sent to if there are committees, and if there are reports, the board should have seen them all already. There's no need to read things over in the board meeting. It's a waste of everyone's time. You get it ahead of time, do your homework. The only thing you might get on the last, at the board meeting are last minute bills that came in that need approval and were not prepared a week ahead of time. And I say getting the board packet ahead of time, I mean not the day before, I mean several days before. The board president presides. Usually they don't need a gavel, but they preside. And that means everything that, in other words, you're running the meeting. But the director, who does not run the meeting, the director is the resource person. And they are a team member and participate actively. Whether you're sitting next to the president or you're sitting across from, down the table from the president, the director has a role. They're not there just to watch. And of course, their report should have been pretty articulate and let you know what's going on. The secretary, whether they take the minutes or someone else does, still has to sign the minutes and approve the minutes, of course. I'm going to come to the treasurer or finance officer in the next slide. Parliamentary procedures. That's a great thing. Many of you, though, are association libraries, and you probably have your bylaws state that you follow Robert's Rules of Order. That is a wonderful thing, except when Robert's Rules of Order do not comply with laws of the state of New York. And I'll give you one example of that. Robert's Rules of Order says that it states that you have whatever your quorum is. If your quorum is half your board, that's your quorum, or half of more than half. It says a majority of the quorum can pass a resolution. No, it can't. All of you, whether you're association libraries or public libraries, need a majority of the entire board to pass any motion, and a majority of the entire board, including vacancies. So if you have a 7-member board and you're vacant 2 people, you still need 5 people to vote. Or you still need 4 people to vote yes on everything. So keep that in mind. Most of you understand that that's the way you deal with it anyway. And the fact of the matter is, and though I have to say it was pretty prevalent in the state over I would just say the last decade or before that, that association libraries would just use the majority of the quorum. And then the next month, guess what? More people would show up and they'd overturn what was done the meeting before. So it just doesn't work properly. Dealing with the public. The next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about open meetings law, so I'm thinking I'm going to jump onto that. All of you, no matter what legal configuration you are, be you municipal, special, school district, or association library, must comply with the open meetings law. You will find it in this link down at the bottom, Committee on Open Government. During the early years of the open meetings law, because some association libraries insisted it didn't apply to them, and then the legislature passed Education Law 260A and said, yes, it does. So you need to notice your meetings. You all do that, I'm sure. And of course on your website, as well as posting and letting the press know about it. Content of minutes, though, it's interesting. Your minutes don't have to be a novel. They only have to be the actions that you have passed, the actions of the board. They can be very short and to the point. There's no reason to ramble on. You don't have to put committee reports. You can, but the content of the minutes are actions of the board. That's all. The more you put in, the more trouble you get into. I guess I should remind you, yeah, I'm going to jump to the end. Your minutes need to be available to the public in 2 weeks. I don't care if they're approved or not. That's irrelevant. Just put unapproved at the top. And I mean on your website. Nobody's coming into your building asking for your minutes. Or if they do, just email it to them. 2 weeks. That's why I say the less minutes, the better. And but I don't mean eliminating important things. If you have personnel actions or bills that are passed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that's in your minutes. Executive sessions, according to an old friend of mine at the Committee of Open Government, the executive sessions are the second most disobeyed law in the state of New York, behind speeding. Executive sessions are not meant to talk about things that are awkward that you don't want to let the public know about. Executive sessions, in your case, if you're going to buy a piece of property, if you're going to talk about giving somebody a raise, if you're going to discuss giving someone a leave of absence because they have a health issue, that's executive session. If you're going to evaluate the director, that's an executive session. None of you have criminal issues going on that I know of. So there's no, you're not, but you do have negotiations from time to time. And that might be negotiating contracts with a vendor and whatnot. But once that's done, that's public. Labor negotiations, yep, that's okay. But when you go into executive session, the law is very, very clear that you need to say why you are going into executive session. And don't just say to discuss personnel. Sorry, that's not good enough. There are guidelines on, of course, of all of this in the trustee handbook. And of course, on the Committee of Open Government site, which by the way, is the best governmental site for just answering questions. They have 15,000 opinions online that you are welcome to. For example, this meeting is not an open meeting because it's an educational meeting and you are not doing any action on behalf of the library. And you'll find that there. Rights of the public. They have the right to watch what you're doing. That's it. They do not have the right to participate in your meeting, although best practice is you do offer them an opportunity for public expression. I know you all do. It's just common sense. My suggestion, if you don't do this already, is to offer an opportunity for public expression in the very beginning of the meeting. So if someone just has a gripe or a compliment, they can go home or go get a cup of coffee or whatever. Or they can, and then offer it again at the end of the meeting if someone wants to hang in there and have a comment. They do not have the right to comment on every motion that you make and every topic you discuss. Indeed, they don't have the right to comment at all, but you can invite them to do that. Here's a caveat about public expression. Since you have the sole discretion of whether you allow it, you also have the sole discretion of placing some rules around it. In other words, if you have a lot of people show up at a meeting, even online, and you believe there's a controversial topic, then you have the right to, at that meeting, before you have public expression, pass a resolution limiting public expression to, say, 4 minutes per participant. That's all. You have that right. Or 2 minutes per participant. But here's my warning on that. Once they're done, you have 2 responses. Thank you very much, or we'll have the director get back to you on that. Do not engage in conversation or discussion because that 4-minute rule just got blown away and you're going to be back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So please, I know it's very tempting as a trustee, but it's much better. It's a meeting of the board. It's not a hearing of the community. And some of you know that a hearing is meant for community participation in public. A board meeting is not. The Sunshine Law is for them to observe you in action. So please keep that in mind. The day will come where you're going to have a controversy, and you're going to remember that, please. Quorum and voting already went over, and posting your minutes we already went over. Again, this website is fantastic. Okay. You have the fiduciary responsibility for the library. That means you should be getting financial reports. You should get at least 2, well, actually 3 financial reports. The first financial report is from a treasurer. Now, if you're a public library, and I have a mini webinar on this, and there's a whole chapter in the trustee handbook if you, an appendix in the trustee handbook. Public libraries, municipal, school district, special district, a trustee cannot serve as the treasurer. You have to hire a treasurer. Association libraries, a trustee can be a treasurer. A treasurer is responsible for the oversight of the comings and goings of your funds. In other words, they are responsible for the reconciliation of bank statements, primarily to make sure the money's still there. Oftentimes, they're the ones that sign the checks. There's a lot of right ways to do it, and we go over that. There's a whole nother webinar on that, but there's guidelines for you that I have that are available actually in the resources I give you later at the end of the workshop. But the financial report that the treasurer provides to the board, and if you hire the treasurer, they don't have to go to the board meeting. They can just provide you the report. How much money do you have in the bank? Do they reconcile the bank statements? Then in addition, you're going to get a financial report hopefully from your accounting office, if you have one, your bookkeeper. your account clerk, that's going to give you year to date what you've spent, what the budget is, what you've spent, a line by line budget. I'm sure you all get this. Um, and hopefully it shows encumbrances, which means money that's promised away. And it's going to show you the amount of money that you're planning on spending that month. In addition, you're going to get warrants or to pay bills. You need to approve these warrants as a board. Now, the controller's office wants the trustees to effectively do what's called a claims audit procedure. And this is a topic of another, workshop. But you need to be aware of what's being spent. And so there's a lot of right ways to do that as well. But if you have a finance officer, if you're a public library or a treasurer or the treasurer in the association library, you should go through the bills every once in a while. Now, some of you may have an elaborate written process. I know the Westchester Library System, for example, has obviously a process and a policy and procedure that's been vetted by the state controller because they gave them the seal of approval. But if you're not aware what the money's being spent on, if you don't see where it's going, make yourself aware. You as a public library in the state of New York are permitted to have as much reserve as you want. There's no limit to it. Of course, there are limits in the real world. If you're a municipal library or you're getting money from the municipality and they see you have a lot of money in the bank, they're going to want some of it or they're going to give you less. If you're a public library and the public sees you have a lot of money in the bank, they're saying, what are you going to use it for? And so it's your responsibility as a board to designate those reserve funds. And there are guidelines, both state and federal, for the Government Accounting Standards Board for managing your reserve funds. So one of the hints that I give to people these days, put money away in a capital fund. It never hurt. People are, if you should be able to save for a rainy day. You should be when your roof is leaking or that new building. It's okay. But I strongly urge you to take the time to get a professional engineering report about your facility and what's going to break and when it's going to break and how much it's going to cost to fix it. That engineering report can go out for 5 or 10 years and give you a shopping list of the things that you need to put money away for. That is wise fiduciary management. You're not like a school that's going to go get 85% of their building project, construction money from the state. It's going to come out of your taxpayer's pocket. Save up for that rainy day. Plan for the future, but plan for it not just by getting a big pile of money, but by getting a report and a plan on how you're going to spend it. And all of you have air conditioning systems that are going to need upgrading. All of you have windows that are going to need to be replaced. Many of you are going to want to put in solar power on your roofs. There's a lot of great things you can do. And all of you, of course, just spent money on COVID protection. How are you going to make that better? Maybe some of you are going to, install those ultraviolet systems in your HVAC systems. Be that as it may, plan ahead. Those of you that are public and are concerned about getting audited, I promise you, if you have a nice fund balance, the state auditor will come in and they'll say, oh, you have $1 million in the bank. And you just throw that report on the table and they'll say, good job, and they'll walk away. Have investment policies if you've got money. That should go without saying, by the way. If you're public, you have to have investment policies. The state controller requires it. And again, there's resources at the end of this for those of you that want to investigate that further. We don't get anything done in a library and in life without having people help us. So the board is responsible for appointing personnel and approving the salaries. This phrase that I've used for decades now, the director selects, the board appoints. The board should not be in the selection process. You should not be reviewing resumes and interviewing people, with one exception. That's what you do for the director. Now, a smart director is going to share their information about their recommendation for higher level positions like an assistant director, or maybe their head of reference with the board before the board, they ask the board to appoint them. And you want to brag about this person you're hiring. But as to the trainees and things like that, come on, the director selects, the board appoints. Now, by the way, it is more than a best practice that an Education Law 226 requires the board to approve these appointments and their salaries. So from time to time, I've found public libraries that are not doing that, and that's wrong. And I know that's awkward when you have civil service, and I can tell you from experience, it is actually fine to do retroactive appointments for pages and clerical staff members because you haven't had a board meeting in a timely fashion. That's okay. Because if you're public, it's going to be pending civil service approval anyway. Indeed, in real life, I have had more than one occasion where I've had the board appoint a page and then terminate a page at the same meeting because the kid lasted a day and I fired him, or they quit, or whatever. So I mean, that happens. It's not a problem, but you need to have that in your minutes. And an easy way to do that is, if you have a lot of personnel actions, is you simply have a personnel report, and that's appended to the minutes. You should reflect your community. It's that simple. And I'm not saying the community that walks in the door, I'm saying the entire community. Gary Strong was a director at Queens many, many years ago. He went to UCLA, which was pretty remarkable. And I had Gary come and talk, because before he became the director at Queens, my library system, little brag here, was the busiest library system in the United States. We circulated more books. Now, of course, we were independent libraries, but we like to take the credit anyway. When Gary got to Queens, he beat me. And I was so ticked off that I invited him to come out and talk to tell us why. And he said it's really simple. He said he hired people that looked like the people that worked in the library, that were in the community. He said we went through the demographics of Queens, and we sought people from the community to work in our libraries. And once they were there, other people in the community that hadn't felt comfortable in the library came. And that continues to this day. I mean, they had citizenship classes for their staff because they were collecting some of the most brilliant, hardworking people from around the world moving to Queens that didn't have very good English, but they might have had a PhD in engineer. They were an engineer or a PhD in something or other from another country. Indeed, when I taught in Queens at the Queens Library System, one of the more inspirational stories, one of our students, who was a branch head at Queens, had been an engineer in Egypt and had left Egypt because he was a Coptic. And he came to America, spoke no English, but lived with a relative who told him to go down the block to the local Queens Library branch, learn English, which he did. And then he took the citizenship classes. And then he went to library school. And he is now the director, he's the manager of that branch. And by the time he was done, I had so many chills I had to call a break and tell everybody to go get a cup of coffee. That's how they became the busiest library system in the United States. Anyway, I'm digressing. Avoid nepotism, and if you have civil service, it's a rock in the stream. Work with it. It's not going to change. But the best way to deal with it is they're not your enemy, is make them your friend, speak with them, and I'm talking mainly to directors here. They're not your adversary. They're there just to obey the law and follow the rules. And if you follow the rules and obey the law, they're there to help you. If you don't, they're not a help. In 1980, I actually met with the Westchester Library System member libraries directors to have a debate about getting out of civil service. I actually had gotten a piece of legislation introduced in the state legislature to have librarians become unclassified civil service, which would be like a teacher. And so let's just say that was 1980. It's now 2021. That never happened. You still have civil service, so you're going to have to deal with it. And it's unique in your particular community, that's for sure. Because you've got the county, I think White Plains, New Rochelle, you've got like 3 civil services in there, so have fun. Policies. This will be quick, but policies are the rules of the library. You as the library board can actually pass laws for your library, and that's what policies are. They just can't contradict any higher law, like the First Amendment, which has to do with like meeting room use. It's a toughie. Policies need to be thoughtfully and revised regularly. That doesn't mean you as a board should be writing policies. It means, I recommend this all the time and nobody likes to do it. It means that every board meeting, maybe one policy should be reviewed. And I don't mean at the board meeting, I mean maybe the director could get it. If you have a policy committee, the director sends one policy a month or every 2 months to the committee and say, these are the changes I recommend in our internet access policy. Or these are the changes, I don't recommend any changes in our fine policy. Or these are the, and let them look at it, and if you need to send it to an attorney, again, you send it to an attorney, and then have the board look at it. Even if it's if there's no changes, it's good to simply put that new date on, revised, reviewed, accepted on such and such a date. I know this is tedious, but the day you get sued because you go to a judge, and I have seen this personally, go to a judge with a policy that's 30 years old, you have a problem. So think about starting a process where you can review policies. Not so it's an onerous burden, but that you get a chance to look at it. By the same token, those of you who are new board members, please ask your director to give you the policy manual, review it. The last thing in the world we need is a trustee to be surprised. And one of the ugliest circumstances I ever got involved in with a member library was a trustee was surprised about the material selection policy because his wife was a middle school principal, found a kid reading a book in school that she thought was horrible and awful and should never be anywhere, especially in a library, confiscated the book, brought it home to her husband, the trustee, and he said, oh, I'll fix this. And he went to the next board meeting and demanded the book be removed from the library. At which point the board said, wait a minute. Don't you know our policy? Let's review it. He didn't stay on the board another 2 months. He eventually quit in a huff. Be aware of the policy. Be aware of the procedures. That's a tough one. Censorship exists. Like I said, and they're useless unless you know about them, and your patrons know about them. Most of you should have them all posted on your websites. I believe you do now, so thank you very much for that. I'm going to wind up with this quick thing about planning. The State Board of Regents revised the minimum standards for public libraries a couple of years ago. And in that, they required you to have a brand new strategic plan as of January 1st, 2021. Well, that kind of got blown up last year. I haven't seen the state knocking on anybody's door about their strategic plan. Some of you have done it. I've seen some of them. They're fantastic. The outline of what we expect, and I say we because I participated with some of my colleagues in putting together a simple process to do strategic planning. Is a 5-step process. We go over this in the trustee handbook. There's a lot of guidance on the state library website. And it starts with this board vision. It starts with what I started with tonight. If you haven't started the process yet, it's time to get going. Don't worry, there's no library police out there, but they're going to, next year when you do your annual report, they're going to want to know if you did it or not. That board vision is important. You have to spend a meeting, or at least a half an hour, saying, why are we here? And then ask your director to assess the state of the library. There's a lot of tools for this. That's not the job of the board. And then getting input from the community is the toughest part of it. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. Um, and then analyze, make a plan. It should be simple, and you need to go through and evaluate it regularly. I believe in an annual process where you say, okay, how are we doing? How, each year you evaluate it and say, where do we go from here? And I personally like to fold it into the director's evaluation. Because if you're saying this is what we want to get done this year, that's what you're evaluating the director on. Now, the good news here, besides all these mini webinars and all this other stuff, is that you actually have an incredible resource sitting somewhere on the screen here. The Westchester Library System has expertise, and a couple of staff members, expertise on putting these plans together, and they're there to help you do it. You don't have to do this alone. Do not reinvent the wheel. They're especially good at the community participation piece, which is the most difficult part. Your director's got a job. This is part of it, but you have a responsibility. You have a cooperative system. Put them to work. I'm trying not to look at Terry here, but I think he agrees completely with it. Put them to work, ask for their input and their help for doing the strategic planning. If you've done already, good for you. You're better than most of the libraries in the state. But once you get it done, this plan goes on your website, and the community needs to see it. So none of these 10-page booklets. Something short and sweet that gives an idea of why you're here and what you're doing about it and where you're going. That's all the people need to know. They don't need to know every single thing that you're going to do. So there's some good examples out there that are fun. It doesn't have to be a hardcore thing, and it should be something that people would leaf through and say, "Oh, that's pretty good. I like that. They're paying attention. This is where they want to go." So that's my. I said meetings shouldn't last 2 hours. An hour and a half is a good time. So that's basically what I've got for you. I know it was an awful lot to go through in one sitting. There are some great resources out there. I'm just going to show you a lot. As Terry said, he's making this available both as a video and the slides available for member libraries and the trustees. All of these links are live. Like I said, if you can't sleep, there's a lot of webinars you can look at. If you have individual questions, the handbook is available online. You can word search it to find any particular issue that you're interested in. I will brag on the handbook. There are a lot of trustee handbooks in the United States. This one is by far the most popular because it's the shortest. It's 14-point type, and it's 1.5 point spacing. We try to keep it so it's readable, and it's something that a trustee at least can dip in and dip and out of. Those of you, I will just put another ad in here. I talked a little bit about legal structure before. I've actually had the great pleasure to talk to probably 10 of your libraries in the county over the last few decades about their, stabilizing their funding, in some cases changing their legal structure. But Rebecca Aldrich from Mid-Hudson, who works with me on the handbook, and I have been actually hired by the state to completely rework their resources on what they used to call the Library District Toolkit. We're scrapping that. It's going to be called, we're going to come out with a new book that'll be online called Strategies for Financial Stability, which will include redistricting, but also 414s and what they call 259 ones, all of the different ways that you can hopefully survive the next pandemic or recession in a little better shape than maybe you've navigated through this particular one. So keep a lookout for that. The state is reviewing it now. They probably think I'm too aggressive, but that's okay. A little bit more, we have other resources. And at this point in time, I'm more than happy to take on some more questions. You've all been very patient. I've only had a couple so far. Terry, you got anything for me?
Nothing in chat. I would say if anyone has a quick question, they can just unmute themselves and ask.
When will it be available? You see that?
Yeah, I did. Let's give us a couple of days. We'll get it out to you.
Thank you, Francis.
Hi, Jerry, it's Jill Davis from the Hendrick Hudson Free Library.
Hi, Jill.
I have a quick question about endowment investing. So, we're an association library and we get the majority of our funds from a tax levy and a pilot, but we will be receiving an endowment, and there's a lot of question about the proper way to invest that, or I guess the laws around investing that.
Okay, you're association library, correct?
Correct.
Okay, you're not limited in any way, shape, or form. So unlike a public library, and this is why I know this is in the back of your head, you've heard this before, public libraries cannot invest in, can only invest in basically secured investments, T-bills, CDs, things of that nature. They can't really make a lot of money these days off the money. Association libraries do not have those limitations. And I don't know how big an endowment you've got or how risky your board, how risk-taking your board is, but you're not limited. You can invest it in anything. However, be careful, I mean, if you're going to use an investment counselor or a service, just use due diligence, use common sense. In other words, the duty of care, and make sure it's a well diversified investment portfolio. But you're not limited at all. But don't get greedy. Don't. GameStop is not for you. But yeah, you're free. You're free to do that. But I would strongly advise that you got some well-trusted professional advice to handle it if it's a decent amount of money. And of course, the endowment, some endowments have a lot of restrictions on them, so I'm not quite sure.
This one does not. It just can't be used for administrative costs.
Oh, good. Okay.
And then I have a second question, which, as I'm sure you probably remember, we received pilot money from Entergy, and Entergy is closing, and there is secession fund money, and we're trying to decide whether or not we are eligible for some of that money. And one of the questions I was asked was if we have the authority to levy taxes. And I'm always a little confused by this because we do put up a levy, but we don't collect the money, and we don't, we vote, our vote goes in the same time that our school district votes.
Okay, so let's start from the end.
Okay.
No, you do not have the authority to levy taxes.
Do
How
not.
do you get your tax money? Through the school district?
Yes.
Okay, so you're doing what's called a 259.1 vote, which is really all votes are that way. But you're a separate proposition on the school ballot. Correct? Okay.
Yes.
So they're raising the money for you, and the money goes through them.
Okay, so if one of the stipulations for applying for the secession fund money is that you have to have the authority to levy taxes, that means we cannot.
Yeah. Now, I will tell you what's interesting, though, and this is kind of fun. That's the same requirement for getting pilot payments. And you got them anyway.
Right. Our school district negotiated the pilot payments for us.
Okay. So now here's the irony of it. If you were a public library, you should be getting a piece of the pilot payment. Many libraries are fortunate, like yourself, in that you have a good relationship with your governmental entities, and since they are raising taxes for you, you're going to get a piece too, which is only fair, but it's not required under general municipal law. The school district could keep your money. Just don't tell them that. But if you're a public, that many school districts actually held the money from the public libraries, which was totally inappropriate. And we caught them on that some years ago, and they could have been punished severely, but they had to pay some money back. But no, you really don't have a legal standing. You just have that wonderful smile of yours and your great politics to rely on. But no, you're not a taxing jurisdiction.
But I could again ask my school district to include us when they apply for cessation funds.
Bingo.
Okay.
That'd be
all
great.
right.
I I guess the question back to the municipal library, the village owns the building. Shouldn't that entity be responsible for a professional engineering report? Yes, they should. If you're not paying for the upkeep of the building, let the village do it. Good point. See, the advantages of being a municipal library are the village is supposed to support you well. And most of you were village libraries and town libraries were founded as association libraries and then gave yourself over to the municipality, usually in exchange for a building. And at the time, you assumed they would give you stable funding. I think in the early 1950s, right after World War II, I was venture 100 association libraries gave themselves to the municipalities because everybody was building in America. The world was great. You know, the war was over, and the library didn't want to go begging for money anymore. So they made the deal with the devil, and then in many cases, that's the last time they got anything out of their village. But Briarcliff Manor did get a new building some years ago. That's for sure. So it's up to them to maintain that building. Whether they do or not, that should be in your agreement. I was a director at a library where part of the building was owned by the library. We added on another section with school district funds, but the village simply had a budget line for maintaining the library, which had, basically used to keep the roof in shape. But they did not provide sufficient funds to actually maintain the entire facility at all, not carpeting and things like that. So I don't know what your deal is, but yeah, they should get a professional engineering report. Why not? What else have we got?
I think we have time for one more, if there is. I think you.
Boy, an easy audience here, Terry.
That's all right. I think it's been a long day for everyone, Jerry. But that was
Yeah.
a lot of information. So thank you.
Okay, I suggest if you had a follow-up, Terry can provide you with my email address. If there's some real oddball issue, he can answer most of them. But on occasion, when we get good ones, we share them. But I want to thank you all for taking the time and effort to be on library boards and to take an hour and a half or so out of your time tonight, out of your day tonight, to spend a little time with me. I thank you very much.
And thank you, Jerry.
Okay,
And,
you guys take care. Thank
all
you.
right. Good night,
you, Jerry.
everyone.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye now.